morning, making money make sense. Weekdays on CBS Mornings.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Deal with the debt ceiling. We got. I think things are going as planned, God willing.
If I'm a member of Congress, I wouldn't want history to pass me by when I could do the biggest cut.
They boxed themselves into a no vote on the most substantial progress that we've ever made.
So I do think, unfortunately, he's decided to move left on some of these issues, and I think it's me that's just being true to kind of what we said we would do.
Hello, I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. The House is set to vote today on the debt ceiling deal to avoid default. The White House and top GOP leadership are pushing lawmakers to approve the agreement, which suspends the debt limit for about 2 years. But multiple conservative and progressive members have said that they will oppose the legislation. Speaker Kevin McCarthy insists that he has the votes needed to get it passed. CBS News congressional correspondent Scott McFarland joins us now from Capitol Hill. Hey, Scott, good to see you. So we're actually having a vote today. This is actually happening. How confident is leadership that this will pass? And do Republicans think that they're going to have a majority of Republicans to pass this bill? What are you hearing?
They're bullish in part because of what happened just as the evening began, a test vote, a preliminary vote of sorts on the rule for this legislation passed with a few dozen Democrats joining Republicans and getting it past the finish line. It won't be exactly the same later tonight when the final vote happens, but it will be likely similar. I spoke with the House Speaker as he walked over for that preliminary vote about what he says about the bill and what he says about its prospects.
Is this a compromise or a victory? Victory.
Gotta keep moving. Keep moving.
The largest cut Congress has ever voted for. It's work requirements on welfare, helping people get jobs.
Pardon the noise. It's just one of those days here. He was emphasizing that he thinks it's a victory. He has billed it as a victory, and he thinks Republicans can call it a victory if they vote in support.
Great hallway interview there, Scott, getting the speaker wherever you can find him. How is Republican leadership talking to some of these conservative members who say that they don't like this deal?
There seems to be this view, Caitlin, that the House Freedom Caucus members were never really winnable on this bill, the farther right conservative members of the House Republican Conference. Now, as for the others, we saw a parade of members of the House Republican Conference, including some of the chairmen of some of the powerful committees, go into the Speaker's office just before going to the floor. It is possible, if not likely, there was still some 11th hour arm twisting. But the preliminary vote has really laid the groundwork here. They're going to lose a few dozen Republicans. They hope to gain a few, if not more, dozens of Democrats to make this a less than narrow margin. But they're bullish. They're optimistic based on what they've seen and what they've heard. And really, a lot of the attention is ready to shift to the U.S. Senate, where action could begin as early as tomorrow.
All right, Scott McFarland in the thick of it all on Capitol Hill. We'll see what the vote unfolds. Thank you so much for your time and reporting. And for the White House perspective on the debt ceiling vote, we have White House Communications Director Ben LaBolt joining us now. Hey, Ben, good to see you. Thanks for being here. So let's talk about this deal. There's been a few progressive Democrats who have been slamming it. What is the White House telling them? And is there really an effort to try to persuade them at this point?
Well, sure. Thanks for having me, Caitlin. Let's take a step back and put some context around this. I mean, if Congress does not pass this bill, it would be the first time in U.S. history that the government defaults on our debt, which could have catastrophic implications. It could tip us into a recession. It could cause 8 million jobs. It could hit borrowing costs around the country and certainly retirement accounts. It would have a catastrophic impact on the American people. So we think it's critical that Congress act quickly to pass this legislation before June 5th. Secondly, for progressive Democrats, if you have continually voted for the signature accomplishments of this administration, which have led to the creation of 12.7 million jobs, 800,000 manufacturing jobs, infrastructure being rebuilt across the country, a clean energy industry, the largest investment in clean energy ever getting off the ground, this bipartisan budget agreement protects those programs, and it's critical that you vote to support this agreement as well. It's a bipartisan compromise. Not every side got everything that we wanted. That's the nature of divided government and of governing in general. But the president believes that there's enough here for Democrats to support.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned this is a bipartisan compromise. I mean, the president had said before that he wouldn't negotiate over the debt ceiling. There's clearly been a negotiation. What changed?
I disagree with you on that front, Caitlin. The president said from the beginning he wouldn't negotiate over default. He's certainly not doing that, and he's not doing it on Republicans' terms. They passed a bill on April 26th that said there needed to be a 22% cut to programs across the federal government, essential programs for hardworking Americans like health care and like education, or they'd let the government default. That's not what's happening here. He said all along he would negotiate over the budget. He presented his budget on March 9th. Republicans responded with theirs on April 26th. And as soon as they did, he picked up the phone. He invited congressional leadership to the White House. He assigned a negotiating team to go to Capitol Hill and to negotiate this bipartisan budget agreement. And instead of those 22% cuts, it's really got flat spending for the next 2 years. It extends the debt ceiling for a couple of years to make sure that we don't default on our debt. And it protects essential programs like Social Security and Medicare. It includes an increase in funding for veterans that the president fought for. So, again, what we've got here is a bipartisan budget agreement. And the president was clear all along he was willing to negotiate over the budget.
And, Ben, you mentioned that this is kind of the reality of divided government here. I mean, this is the first time that we really see on this kind of big deal, the president and McCarthy coming to an agreement here. I'm curious what the White House, what the president learned about working with McCarthy. Did the president's perception of him change at all? And is this, you know, a precursor for what we could see down the line in terms of working with the speaker on other major issues?
Well, President Biden has a long history of bipartisanship dating back to his decades in the Senate, his time as vice president, and even this presidency. He's negotiated a couple of big things like the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the CHIPS and Science Act to build semiconductors in this country in the first 2 years of the administration, when many people said bipartisanship was dead and the president wouldn't be able to get it done. This was a good faith negotiation. The president worked with all four congressional leaders, as well as the speaker, directly to close in on this final agreement. And we think it's going to result in something very important for the American people, which is making sure the economy doesn't go off the cliff and that all of the economic gains of the last 2 years are preserved.
And Ben, just quickly here, what is next for the White House in terms of agenda items now that we are expecting this to pass?
Well, I think you'll hear more about the president's economic vision in the weeks ahead. Really, he has fought against trickle-down economics, which for decades he doesn't think has been effective, and instead talked about investing in America. You're seeing manufacturing come back in this country. You're seeing an end to a reversal of offshoring. Some of these industries that had been built overseas in the past few years in China, which have been gaining in infrastructure and semiconductors and clean energy, we're bringing those industries back to America. So I think you'll hear more from the president on that front. There's also some things in the president's unity agenda that we believe, even with a divided Congress, we can make progress on congressionally. And that means things like taking on the opioid crisis in this country, or expanding access to mental health treatment and dealing with that epidemic as well. So there's a lot on the agenda to come. But first, we have to make sure this legislation passes both the House and the Senate.
Yeah, the Senate a factor here as well, of course. Ben LeBolt, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And the debt ceiling agreement has created a divide within the Republican Party. Next, we'll talk to two congressmen who helped Speaker McCarthy negotiate the deal. You're streaming America Decides.
If it's important to our nation,
I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
It's on Face the Nation.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And it becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag #OscarSoWhite was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, we're going to tell you about that, too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme,
the threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Let's bring in our partners at the Weather Channel.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News. An original documentary from CBS reports.
The carnage in our nation's schools has become painfully repetitive.
Not one more child!
School shootings have parents fighting mad.
I promised my daughter I was going to fight. It's going to keep on happening.
And teachers taking lessons in how to fight back.
This is an exercise.
We approach it as it's you or them.
It shouldn't have to be your teacher's job to protect your life.
But will the battle over gun control,
people are afraid that they're going to lose their gun rights altogether,
be the hardest lesson of all?
The exercise, you're having to shoot at an adult. Are you prepared to have to kill one of your students?
Guns in the Classroom, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Everybody wakes up in the morning and they are pelted with alerts that frighten them, news that agitates them. With this show, we have the time to explain what's going on. Here's a deeper understanding of what's happening.
Prime Time with John Dickerson. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to America Decides. Former House Speaker John Boehner was at the center of the 2011 debt ceiling standoff. Remember that one? Well, he spoke to CBS News' Major Garrett for the takeout about today's debt limit fight.
And I knew they would always come to an agreement. There wasn't any doubt because McCarthy, everybody understands you can't violate the debt limit. They weren't going to do that. And so they got themselves a deal. Good. When you don't have many tools or levers available, you have to use what is available, and the debt limit is available. That's why in 2011, Democrats controlled the Senate, Republicans controlled the House, Obama was in the White House. I had no choice but to use the one lever available to try to move the country in a direction that I wanted it to move in, but more fiscal responsibility. So they did the right thing.
And you can hear more of that and stream new episodes of The Takeout every Sunday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
After today, really just seeing how DeSantis got conviction for what he wants to do for our country, I am starting to stray toward his direction.
I think it was a great opening speech. I mean, he kind of laid out a good case for why he'd make a great president.
I think he did great. I was honestly undecided when I started, when I came in, and he said all the things that I wanted to hear.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is in Iowa courting supporters following the first few campaign stops in the Hawkeye state. You heard from those voters there. Later this week, former President Donald Trump will also visit Iowa to continue his campaign. DeSantis has finally taken the offensive against Trump, who has been criticizing the Florida governor for months. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins me from Pella, Iowa. Ed, great to see you and that beautiful Iowa backdrop behind you. Nice to be out on the campaign trail again. So you've been following DeSantis in his first swing through the state as an official candidate. And what's interesting, and I know you've noted this before, is that he is showing a willingness to go after former President Trump after months, really, of attacks. What do you make of that, and how is that kind of fitting in to his pitch to Iowa voters at this point?
Directly to voters in a church hall or a wedding venue like this one, it appears to be a little more subtle or softer. He pointed out last night, for example, that when he was last here a few weeks ago, he managed to show up in the Des Moines area and he thought the weather was great, which was a subtle nod to anybody who's been paying attention to the fact that former President Trump had to cancel an event in the same area of Des Moines out of concern for a tornado watch, which never materialized into an actual tornado. So it's those kind of subtle jabs you hear in his remarks to voters. But then under questioning by reporters later, he was a little more direct, making clear that he doesn't think former President Trump can find the support necessary to win a general election, and also found that, or argued that in 2022 he won by such a decisive margin in Florida, he argues, because he had proven to voters who maybe were skeptical of him during his first run in 2018 that he was too much like former President Trump, arguing now that he's become a far different Republican and somebody that can stand on his own. So we'll see as it continues here in Iowa and then New Hampshire and South Carolina later this week and beyond, whether the attacks on Trump become more direct when he's talking to voters, whether he just keeps at it more directly when he's talking to us in the media, understanding that part of the reason his numbers have fallen back as much as they have is because the former president filled the space by attacking DeSantis, raising questions about his leadership, some of which he's now had to backtrack because he realized he was miscalculating. But there's been an effect. And so DeSantis, eager to join the fray and to take it to the former president, now more willing openly to discuss it when he's asked.
And Ed, you mentioned Florida. I know that you were down in Florida a couple of weeks ago reporting about the end of the legislative session when DeSantis had signed a whole bunch of bills. How much is he talking about Florida in Iowa? In other words, how much is this a campaign kind of running as an experienced governor from a state like Florida?
That's what it's all about. He has argued, his team had argued in the lead up to this launch of the campaign that, you know, people have heard of him. Governor of Florida took on COVID, is taking on Disney, but they may not realize the extent to which he's enacted such an impressively conservative agenda, restricting access to abortion services, flying immigrants out of the state, making changes to education policy that bar any discussion of gender or sexual identity now to some extent, banning diversity, equity, inclusion programs at public universities or public funding for them at public universities, changing death penalty laws, all sorts of things that make heads nod and hands come together in applause here in Iowa, you know, campaign venues. The other thing he's going to be talking a lot more about now, as he signaled last night, is the fact that in his view, he has now been able to put in place the most conservative state Supreme Court in the country by nominating and getting confirmed 7 different Republican appointees to the state Supreme Court, reminding voters, because there was interest in this and concern back in 2016, that the next president, especially if they get 2 terms, which he would like to do, might have the opportunity to appoint up to 4 Supreme Court justices, succeeding the older ones and maybe others who, for whatever reason, step away. So, you know, all of it right now is about explaining his record. And then he's got his wife with him, Casey DeSantis, his most trusted aide, as one spouse would normally be, but somebody who's also served as a pretty shrewd strategist, who then tries to lighten it up and talk about their young children. They have 3 young children, the issues they face as parents on Saturday mornings when there's dance class and t-ball. You and I both are familiar with that idea. And that is designed to pull at the heartstrings of the younger voters that show up, or maybe the grandparents who do and remember when they were young parents or know that their children are. So there's a sort of a 1-2 punch there, who he is as a person and all the work he's been doing as a governor.
And kind of a contrast in that way to Trump and perhaps even Biden in terms of age. Obviously, next week, it's going to be an even more crowded field. We are expecting Governor Christie to announce a presidential run next week. We're also seeing, we also have reporting here at CBS News that former Vice President Mike Pence is planning to announce a run next week. How does this change the dynamics of this race? It seems like the more crowded the field, the better that is for Trump. But what do Pence and Christie kind of bring to the table here?
It's a good question. I think you're going to see them handle this a little differently. Pence is going to be here in Iowa constantly, believing that he can win over the evangelical, Christian, socially conservative vote, and essentially try to mount what amounts to a campaign for governor by being here all the time, although he won't be the only one. Christie, at least in the early reporting, it suggested he's going to be relying on a national campaign and earned media. Well, that's political strategist for we got no money and no staff. And so the more airtime we get, the more we hope to climb in the polls. Will either of those strategies work? We'll see. But as we remember from 2016, the more crowded the Republican field gets, the easier it is for Donald Trump to hold on to that, high 20s, 30, maybe 40% of the vote that's with him.
Yeah, and why he's welcoming some of these candidates into the race. But it will be interesting to see what he has to say about his former running mate. Ed in Iowa, great to see you. Thanks for your reporting, and we'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
And coming up, Congressman Garrett Graves and Patrick McHenry helped Speaker McCarthy negotiate the debt ceiling agreement. And next, we'll ask them how they feel about Republican dissent over that deal. They're streaming America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS Reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, and fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony DeVolder from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She dazzled on the court and off the court as a businesswoman.
Thank you for joining us on Person to Person. Tennis superstar and entrepreneur Serena Williams.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job? I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgment of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
On our places, bright shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
While many Republicans on Capitol Hill have praised Speaker McCarthy and the debt ceiling agreement, others in the party have not been shy to voice their dismay.
This is the very thing that we all campaigned to put an end to.
It's time to go back to the drawing table. It's time for us to say no.
This is not honest with the American people, and then it does not do what we've been told that it does. It's wrong.
This town was cutting another crap deal that's going to put you more in debt with no real changes whatsoever.
And Republican lawmakers Garrett Graves and Patrick McHenry join us now. Congressman McHenry is also chair of the Financial Services Committee. And Congressman McHenry, I will start with you. You heard the criticism there from some in your conference. You've been hearing it all day over the past few days. What do you say to those conservatives who say that they don't like this deal?
Well, first of all, it is a good deal. It actually reduces spending year over year for the first time in debt ceiling negotiations. It has $2 trillion of savings over the next 10 years, and actually has key conservative reforms like work requirements included in this. And we only control the House. We don't, Democrats control the Senate and the White House, obviously. So it doesn't complete the picture, but it is a better piece of legislation than what we have currently in law. So this improvement, this conservative policy, is the reason why they should support the package. Furthermore, I'd say the best way to get media attention in Washington is for one Republican to attack another Republican. And so that's the reason why we have a small group that's getting a lot of attention about this bill.
Yeah, Congressman Graves, I mean, I'm curious about your response to them as well, given that you were a key negotiator in this. And I'm also curious, I mean, do you think that Democrats, that Biden actually got anything out of this?
Yeah, sure. So look, number one, let's be very clear. The criticism that they're expressing is because they'd like to see more savings. They'd like to see greater reduction in spending. And I assure you that Congressman McHenry and I share those objectives. But at the same time, you have to choose the best option that's in front of you. The options that are in front of us right now are defaulting on the debt. They're the president inventing some authority under the 14th Amendment. It is a cleaner debt ceiling that would probably include little to no cuts, or it's this one that has the greatest savings in American history, the greatest rescission of funding from federal agencies in American history, transformative improvements on work requirements, on pay-as-you-go regulatory compliance for federal agencies and other things that are major wins. And so all day long, we will take the most conservative, the best option that's out there, not this imaginary fifth option that simply doesn't exist. In regard to Democrats, look, I think that Democrats are in a box right now. The reality is that I think that the White House got schooled in these negotiations. There is nothing in here that they can point to that's a win for them. These are all conservative Republican wins that are in this legislation. But they're in a box because the president is up for a re-election. He has got to appear strong. So they've got to work to sell this among the Democrat caucus to help make this president look like a good negotiator, look like a strong candidate for re-election.
And you both mentioned kind of the realities of governing in divided government, that this is kind of the parameters of a deal. Congressman McHenry, I'm curious about your perspective on how McCarthy has handled this. I mean, obviously, I think our viewers will remember the speakership fight. I know you have been a key ally of his. Is his job in any way in actual jeopardy? And how do you think he navigated this?
Well, I think the speaker did a masterful job in how he negotiated and got us to the negotiating table. Keep in mind that the speaker met with the president on February 1st and said, let's just negotiate the debt ceiling. We can do this without drama. 97 days later, after the House Republicans and the speaker passed a bill to raise the debt ceiling with key conservative reforms, the president finally agreed and relented that he was going to negotiate. And even while Garrett and I and the speaker's team were negotiating with the White House staff, the White House denied actually negotiating on the debt ceiling. So frankly, I think the speaker handled this in a masterful way, and the president handled it in a very incompetent, bumbling way, listening to Chuck Schumer's strategy and missing every strategic turn that they could possibly have had to make things better for their party. So what we have here are fiscal restraint measures, conservative policy originated in the House or Republican House of Representatives that make things better for the American people and over time can reduce inflation and will reduce federal spending. So that's what's contained in this package. No liberal policy, no set of trade-offs, just wins for a conservative vision for America. And the only critics we have are saying that it's not enough, but it is something and it is more than we currently have, and they cannot deny that.
And Congressman Graves, since you've been at the center of these negotiations with the White House, can you quickly just kind of take us behind the scenes? What did you learn about negotiating with this president? And is it something that you think House Republicans can do on other measures?
Well, look, your inference is correct. This is really the first time we had a big, serious negotiation. I think it was a scenario, as Congressman McHenry noted, that Speaker McCarthy had really good leverage in this instance because we had a strong House position, a strong House bill, but we also had the reality of negotiating a bill that was going to have to get through the Democrat-controlled Senate and signed by a Democrat president. So a lot of, I think, kind of relationship establishing, determining trust and things along those lines. I'll tell you, Shalonda Young, who's the head of the White House Office of Management and Budget, is really bright, very, very impressive negotiator. And we did have some very tense, strong negotiations over time. The meetings blew up, and we went back to our corners on multiple occasions. But look, I think it's because we pushed them to the absolute edge. We got the best deal that was possible. And I think what's important to note here, this is going to be the most historic agreement in history in regard to changing the trajectory of Washington spending, saving funds, and helping to get some conservative policy wins as well. So again, to my conservative friends that are out there asking for a fifth option that doesn't exist, what we need to be doing is supporting the bill that's the most conservative, that's the most transformative, and that's what this one does.
And I know you and Shalonda Young share the same home state of Louisiana, so maybe that's key to all of this as well. Congressman Garrett Graves.
But my gumbo's better.
Okay. Well, we'll have you back to talk about that next. Both, thank you. Congressman Garrett Graves and Patrick McHenry, thank you for your time. And that does it for us today. You can stream America Decides Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.
It's a history-making meeting. 4 extraordinary women who are all 4-star generals and admirals.
How did you deal with being discriminated against?
I just worked harder. The future of an ever-evolving U.S. military when we go person to person.